afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
See, we have completed that discussion on groups and group properties. I'll be discussing conflict today, okay? Because when we discuss groups, we discuss conflicts also, which is obviously whenever we have groups, there are always some chances of conflicts that may happen in groups. So we need to understand why conflicts happen and what managers need to do if there are conflicts. So that will be my discussion for today. Okay. All right. So I'll share the slide. Okay. Conflict management. Can you see that?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So now, conflicts. What are they? Conflicts are, as we all know, is it's a process that prevails when there are some differences in a group, or one person or one party does not agree with the other party, or one party's work or interest starts negatively affecting the other party. So naturally, there will be conflict. So there is some incompatibility of goals. There is some incompatibility of purpose. There are certain disagreements that may be there. Some differences may be there based on behavior, based on anything, disagreement on fact, disagreement on style of working, disagreement on anything that concerns the organization. This is what conflict is. And when conflicts happen, we need to intervene and we need to do something about conflicts. So conflicts can be task conflict, which is some conflict which is there on the tasks, what we are doing. So if there is a disagreement between me and you on what we are doing, then that is a task related conflict. Or there could be a relationship related conflict. For example, people in an organization, they may have interpersonal problems. Somebody doesn't like somebody else, or somebody has some issues with someone else, and so on. So any kind of difference based on relationship, based on how people are talking and communicating and connecting, the interpersonal relationship issues may be there, and that is how relationship conflicts may happen in organizations. So for example, I don't like my team member, or I don't like a certain person. So naturally there might be some differences in our way of working and so on. Those things, they happen everywhere. So conflicts are a natural part, they are a perennial part of any organization. Process conflict, again, conflict over how work has to be done. So I may say this is how we'll do, and you say something else, and that is how conflicts ensue. So these are different types of conflicts. Now, how have scholars and theorists, how have they looked at conflict? Now, the traditional perspective of conflict was that all conflict is harmful. Conflict was seen as a negative construct. It was seen as, an idea that was supposed to be, in a way, detrimental to the working of an organization, or the smooth, conduct of workplace activities. So all conflict was seen as harmful and had to be avoided. Now, avoided means that something had to be done to either avoid conflict, or if conflict had happened, something had to be done to stop that conflict from continuing. So management had to take harsh steps. They had to intervene and they had to take harsh steps, maybe punishing the people who are conflicting, or some kind of harsh steps had to be taken in order to curb the conflict right away. So conflict was seen as detrimental, it was seen as harmful, it was seen as against the working and spirit of the organization. So all conflicts had to be curbed. Then there was this human relations view of conflict. Human relations school we have already discussed. So human relations view of conflict, it said that conflicts are natural. They will happen. Whenever you have a group, conflicts are inevitable. They will be there. Only thing is that we have to understand conflict. We have to perceive that there is a conflict, and then yes, we may take some steps to stop conflict, but they will be there, they will happen. So we have, as a manager, I have to accept that some conflict will be there. This is the human relations view of conflict that came after that. So traditional view is the earlier view, like the 1920s and 30s, but human relations came after that. And then 50s and 60s, human relations was very predominant. So then we had this idea that, like, okay, it's fine, conflicts will be there. We just have to take some steps to stop it from continuing. Then we had the more modern view of conflict, the interactionist view of conflict, which said that not all conflict is harmful or wrong or bad. It said that conflicts are natural, they are inevitable, they will happen, and most importantly, they should happen. This is the more modern perspective to conflict, called as the interactionist view of conflict, which says that conflict is actually, it could be a positive force, and it is actually necessary for a group to function. Now, this idea is, it has semblance to the ideas that we have already discussed at different points of time initially. When we discussed the concept of norms, we discussed something related to this. When we discussed the concept of status, again, we had discussed something related to this. Conformity, if you can recollect all those things. When we discussed the idea of group composition, diversity, the population of the group should be diverse and people from different backgrounds and different skills and gender, they should be part of the group. Diversity brings in fresh ideas, but there will be conflicts when there are diversity. But it is okay, a certain level of disagreement, difference is fine, so long as it doesn't, stifle the working of the organization. A certain degree of difference is okay. So we have discussed all these things earlier also when we discussed a group. So the interactionist view says that some amount of conflict is okay. In fact, it should be there. It's positive, because here we are talking about differences which obviously will be there, and because of those differences people will think differently, they will work differently. And modern day organizations have to promote a culture where people work differently, think differently, because all modern day organizations have to keep thinking of creative solutions. They have to keep thinking of innovation. They have to keep thinking of how to pivot, how to move to something new, a new market, a new idea, a new process, a new technology. You cannot continue to be, stagnant as an organization. You have to grow, you have to be dynamic, you have to change. And for this growth, for this dynamism, for this change, some kind of creativity, innovation has to be encouraged. And creativity and innovation only happens when people differ. So I discussed yesterday in the previous class, I discussed the concept of group think. Everybody starts thinking in the same manner. It happens. But group think is not good. If everyone is thinking in the same manner, then there is hardly any scope for new thought, out of the box idea or innovation. So somebody has to play the devil's advocate. Somebody has to differ. Somebody has to think different. Somebody has to think new. And that is how, something new will happen. So some amount of conflict is actually positive. It is okay. It should be encouraged. That is what the interactionist view of conflict says. So this is the modern perspective. It talks about two types of conflicts, functional and dysfunctional. So it says that some conflict, as we just now discussed, is positive. It will be okay for group dynamism. It will be okay for people to differ, to disagree. But naturally, that differing or disagreement has to be done in a civilized manner. It doesn't mean that creating commotion or chaos in the organization. So positive confrontation is okay. So as a boss, if I say something and you don't agree to me, for example, with me, then if you do it in a positive manner, if you confront me in a positive manner, so we say positive confrontation. So confrontation is, it sounds daunting, it sounds scary, it sounds like a negative word. But confrontation, when we say positive confrontation, it means civilized opposition. And civilized opposition is agreeable, it is acceptable, and it should be there. Organizations should be ready for civilized opposition among people. Managers should be ready for a no. They should be ready to hear to the differences which are there, listen to the differences and disagreements which are there. So long as it is positive and it is in the interest of the organization, it is okay. It should be encouraged. And good managers, they encourage this positive functional conflict. But yes, when conflict starts hindering group performance, when it becomes dysfunctional, when it starts disrupting, when it starts creating commotion, problems, then we say that now conflict is dysfunctional. That has to be taken care of. That has to be, you know, stopped. So that is what is important. So most of the time, when we talk about conflict, we are basically talking about dysfunctional conflict, because conflict has become a negative, we have started perceiving it as a negative conflict. So most of the time, all the literature that you would read, all the theories that you would read, books that you would read, they will always look at conflict as a negative concept, from the negative perspective. So most of the time, conflict, when we discuss conflict, we are discussing the dysfunctional aspect of conflict. So what do we do? What happens when dysfunctional conflict happens, and what do we have to do? That is what I'll be discussing today. If you look at this graph, the top part of the slide, what can you make out? What can you surmise from this graph? Can somebody simplify this graph for us? What does it mean? Mohammad Asad?
Ma'am, when there is more performance to do,
Razeen,
there
yeah.
is the level of conflict is high.
When there is low performance. Okay, so let me then ask you a very basic question. In a graph, what are the two axes?
Unit of performance and level.
No. So what are they called? The two axes are called as
X and Y.
X and Y. Which is the independent axis? Independent variable, which one of them is the
X-axis.
x-axis? So x-axis is the independent variable, and y-axis is the dependent variable. So I'm teaching you basic maths. Okay, now what happens? So now come to what you were saying, Razeen. Now explain. X-axis affects the y-axis, the dependent. Y is always the dependent variable. X is always the independent variable. Now can you explain, Razeen, or somebody else? Can you explain the graph?
Then when level of conflict
Graph.
is low,
Yeah.
then the performance is less because there are no new ideas. But if it is too much of conflict, then also it is bad because people will not work properly,
Right.
so performance decrease. And
Okay.
when it is optimal, there is best
Okay.
performance.
So at point A, what is happening? At point A, conflict is low or minimal, almost zero. So what is happening? Performance is also low. That is what it is, Kanishka?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So what is happening at point A is, because conflict is low, performance is also low. This is what we just now discussed, that when there is no conflict in an organization, so probably what is happening is that it may give you a semblance that probably everything is very good in the organization and there is consensus and all that. But yesterday we discussed that there could appear to be an illusion of consensus and unanimity. Actually there may be problems, but nobody is speaking out, nobody is saying anything because of fear or apprehensions, because of anything like that, many other reasons. Many times we just keep quiet, we don't differ, we don't speak, we don't want to get into any kind of problems or whatever. And so there may appear to be no conflict, no problems, everything is fine, there is unanimity and so on. But what is happening is that probably we are all into that, those murky waters of groupthink, and we are not thinking differently, we are not thinking new, we are not bringing in any fresh paradigm into our thoughts and into our policy making or whatever. And as a result of that, our performance will be very, very normal or less or low or mediocre or whatever. It will not be high, it will be low performance as compared to maybe your competitors or whatever. But as conflict increases, we say it is functional conflict because some amount of differences are okay. So as conflict increases up to point B, a certain point, we see that performance is improving or going up, which means that it is okay. This kind of conflict is functional. So up till point B, for example, we see that it reaches its optimal level, but beyond that, it again starts to go down. It starts to go down because now I think conflict becomes dysfunctional. It becomes too much of conflict. And too much of differences you can't handle. Every day if everyone is disagreeing, that also is not very good. So too much of differences, too much of disagreements, again we can't handle that, and then conflicts become dysfunctional. So there is a certain level where conflicts could be okay, but beyond that level conflicts may become dysfunctional. Now what is that okay level? What is that optimum level where conflict will maximize performance? Is there any formula for that? Is there any mathematical algorithm that we can put to use? Okay, this is the optimal level. Is there anything like that? Lata, Abdul Ahad.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, manager, ma'am, there is no formula because, ma'am, there is no formula to work, but the only thing the manager can do is by looking the employee and by seeing their habits, how they're interacting and communicating with them.
Yes, because
Only,
it will depend on the organization. It will depend on a lot of things. It will depend on what kind of company you are, what industry you are catering to, how big you are, how many people you have, what are these people doing, what kind of work they are doing, what kind of manager you are, what culture your company has. It will depend on so many things. Industry to industry, the demands on creativity, they differ. According to you, which are the industries that require too much of creativity and creative thinking and creative innovation? Is it the same in all industries?
No, ma'am.
It differs, isn't it? Some industries may require more innovative thinking, more creative thinking, creative disruption on a daily basis. High-end technologies, for example, every day something new is happening. Some company which is developing a software for mobile phones, for example, or some apps for mobile phones, every day something new is required, every day some new feature is needed, and so on. But for example, a company which is into manufacturing of iron and steel, is the demand for creativity the same as technology company or software company or a
No,
mobile
ma'am.
phone company? It may not be the same, because steel processing, steel industry, the same process probably is carried out day in and day out, and the demand of on creativity is not that high. It's only at certain points of time that they need to change the process, or they need to change the technique or something, but it is not on a daily basis. So there are certain organizations, certain industries that require more creativity, more innovation, and so therefore more new thoughts and new patterns and new processes and so on and so forth. So naturally, in those kinds of companies, we would be requiring people to think innovatively and experiment and do new things and so on and so forth. So the definition of conflict in these companies will differ as compared to maybe a traditional manufacturing company where the demands on creativity are different, the work culture is different, the processes are different, the market is different, industry is different. So maybe they don't require to be that creative on a daily basis. So the nature of conflict will also be different. The definition, as I said, of conflict will differ. So, how much is this good conflict and functional conflict and optimal conflict? That there is no formula for that. That will depend on your culture, your people, how big your company is, how many people you are managing, what markets you're catering to, what industries you're catering to, and so on and so forth. But yes, as a manager, you have to understand, you have to gauge, you have to discern what should be this optimal level of conflict, which is okay for the organization, which is not being which is not hurting the working or the interest of the organization. So we need to decide that, and then we need to understand as managers that how much conflict, how much differences we can allow, and how much we can't. This lower part of the slide is what I have already discussed: low conflict and so on. So I think I have already. So low conflict, point A. If you look at the table, what are the characteristics of the unit? They may be stagnant or non-responsive, or there is lack of new idea, and that is why performance is also low. In case of optimal conflict, you become more innovative and viable, and performance is high. In case of high conflict, point C, again it is dysfunctional because there is too much of conflict, chaotic, uncooperative, disruptive it becomes, and again performance becomes low. So this is how the nature of conflict may differ, and this is how we understand what is functional and dysfunctional conflict. Now, we'll discuss the conflict process now. How conflicts happen, and when they really happen, what do we do? And remember that now when we are discussing these things, we are always referring to the negative conflict, the dysfunctional conflict. The conflict process. The conflict process can be understood in the form of these five stages. Stage one is the factors that lead to conflict, the antecedent constructs, the antecedent conditions that lead to conflict. Okay, there could be a lot of factors that could lead to conflict. These are just some of the factors: communication problems, structure, personal variables. These could be some of the factors that could lead to conflict. So, stage one is the antecedent conditions. Why do conflicts happen? Any idea? Why conflicts really happen most of the time?
Mainly because misunderstanding.
Sorry, Varis?
Mainly because misunderstanding.
Misunderstanding. Yeah, you're right in a certain way. Most of the
Because
conflicts
of
they
different
happen.
thinking.
Yeah.
Because of different
Clash,
thinking.
difference of ideas.
Abdul Ahad,
Yes, ma'am.
because of
Different thinking of people. They
different thinking, right? What else, Vakas?
Some difference of opinion.
Right. So, in a way, communicative issues, right? Most conflicts they happen because of communication barriers and communication issues and misunderstandings and misgivings that you just now talked about. Noise in communication. What is this noise? You have read a paper on business communication, right? What is this noise? How is it figuratively used in communication? What do we refer to? Nidal Ahmed? When we say there is noise in communication, what are we referring to? Literal noise? What is it?
Not not only literal noise, there are the barriers in communication.
See,
Maybe some
generally
one of the
speaking, what is noise?
reluctance.
Barrier. So generally speaking, noise is any loud sound which is coming. Okay. All right. So if, for example, if we are talking, if you and me are talking, and if somebody shouts, there is a noise, and we can't hear each other. Now, this noise is used in a certain different sense also. Noise is anything which will disrupt communication. So any barrier, not just literal noise, but any barrier that disrupts communication will be seen as noise. So, any kind of barrier in communication, any kind of misunderstandings, any kind of semantic difficulties. I don't understand what you're saying. You don't understand my language or what the words that I'm, using. Any of those things could lead to conflict. What are semantic barriers? Can somebody explain semantics? Kanishka?
But related to
I don't know
language.
this word.
Related to language. Okay, Kanishka,
I don't know this word.
you don't know. So semantics is basically about language. Okay, about the meaning of words. Okay, that's the literal meaning of semantics. What words mean? Do words mean the same thing for everybody? If I'm using a certain word, okay, I'm speaking in English right now. All of you understand English, but do words have the same meaning? Do words have the same connotations? No. One word could mean something else to Kanishka, for example, and something else to whatever Varis or Vakas or somebody. So there are semantic differences in the way we understand words. So the same thing could have different meanings for different people depending on how that thing was said, when it was said, by whom it was said. So it may have different meanings, right? Do you agree with this?
Yes, yes.
Right. So the same language, the same word could imply, and the way it is said, the way I say something, it could have different meanings. If I laugh and say something, it has a different meaning. If I become serious and say the same thing, it has a different meaning. So these are all semantics. These are all communication barriers, noise, which happen, which lead to conflicts. And these are all everyday phenomenon. Every day your manager would say something, your boss can say something, your leader would say something, your junior would say something. And what they are saying, how they are saying, words that they are using, all of these communicative issues, they could create misunderstandings, they could create problems, and they could create, conflicts. So communication is the number one culprit, that leads to conflicts. um, it just reminds me of this Maruti case. Have you heard of this labor problem unrest that happened at Maruti few years back, 9, 10 years back? The labor unrest. It was a very serious uh, strike and labor dispute that took place at Maruti. 7, 8 years. It continued for 2, 3 years actually. So that is why it is a bigger period. 7, 8 years, 9 years. Have you heard of that?
Ma'am, the one in which they murdered their
Yes,
manager.
yes, yes. So are you aware of what happened?
Not the details, ma'am. No.
Not the details. Oh, so you are aware of something. You are aware something happened, right?
Mhm.
And
They
Maruti
robbed.
had taken, because at that time what happened was that there were several similar incidences that took place in several companies, especially automobile companies. But Maruti is supposed to be an iconic company in India. What is the importance of Maruti in India? Salah?
They were the first manufacturers of,
Small
or
car. Okay.
yes.
It is said in certain ways that Maruti started this car revolution in India. It was only after Maruti that middle class people started buying cars. Before that, there were very few cars, mainly government vehicles and ambassadors and Fiats. It was only after Maruti 800 was launched that it became a common possession for middle class people. And so Maruti started this car revolution, small car revolution, family car, whatever, in India. So Maruti is an iconic company. Maruti had this joint venture with Suzuki. And so the practices that Maruti started in India, they were those practices that were considered to be benchmark practices, which no other company had adopted in India before that. They were unheard of. For example, they started with quality circles, total quality management, a lot, because they were all Japanese techniques, which were commonly associated with Toyota and Honda and many of these automobile companies. Most Japanese management practices that we know of, Kaizen and Kanban and total quality management and just-in-time supply chain and all those things, they have all come from Japan, and they have primarily come from Japanese automobile manufacturers. So Maruti also had those practices. So quality circles or TQM or Kaizen, they were all adopted by Maruti, and those were the first company. I mean, Maruti was the first company to actually adopt these practices in India. So these were unheard of. And after they became successful in India, many other companies in the automobile sector in India and other sectors, they started adopting those practices. Like even engineering sector, BHEL and many other companies, they started, using those practices which Maruti had brought in. So Maruti was supposed to be a benchmark company. It was an iconic company for India. It was said that if you visit, I don't know if somebody has visited, but if it was said that if you visited a Maruti factory, you could not find anything amiss. The way they had the assembly lines, the layout, the plant design, the processes that they were following, the technology they had in place, the machines, the equipment, everything was, just the best that any company could have. So basically, it was a benchmark. It was a kind of a company of its own. And Maruti had got maximum awards, especially for HR practices. Its HR practices were supposed to be one of the best, and a lot of companies, they adopted Maruti's HR practices, performance appraisal and training practices, and so on. So as an HR model, Maruti was again supposed to be one of the best companies in India, and other companies were imitating its or emulating its HR practices. Now, why I'm discussing all this is that a company like this suddenly had an HR problem, and workers went on strike, and workers went on violent, strikes, and there was a huge labor unrest, a violent labor unrest, so violent that the HR head was murdered on the campus, on Maruti's premises at Manesar in Gurgaon. He was killed by the striking workers, the vice president HR. And when this happened in Maruti, several other automobile companies also started having similar problem. But that is a different issue. Now, what happened at Maruti was, because Maruti was a big organization, and there were a lot of small companies in this entire Manesar belt, in this entire Gurgaon belt, that were providing parts and components to Maruti. Now, when Maruti had a problem, all of these companies, they also started having problem, because they were supplying to Maruti. The work was stopped at Maruti for several days. So workers in these small manufacturers, they also got affected. Their families got affected. Violent protests were taking place on this Delhi Gurgaon highway, and it was burning. at that time. It was all everywhere on social media and whatever, television and news and everything. And finally, the government of Haryana had to intervene, and then they had to go for a compromise with the workers and managers and so on, because it had become a violent strife. And it continued for days and days. And even after the government had intervened and some collective bargaining was done, even after that, the matter was not settled. Now, after 2, 3 years, a lot of researchers from HBR, Harvard Business School, and other schools, they wanted to study what happened at Maruti, because they had never thought that something could happen at a company like Maruti, which had the best HR practices. And their teams came up, especially this Harvard Business School team. They came to India to study what happened at Maruti. And they said that we cannot understand what happened because nothing has actually happened. Everything is fine. There is no problem. It was just misunderstanding, because of which things, became so big that people lost their lives. So that is what I'm trying to say, that these semantic difficulties, these misunderstandings, these communication barriers, they can be, such serious issues that they can lead to a conflict of that proportion. So when they talked to people and when they tried to investigate and so on, they found that there was no problem as such. There was no real issue. It was just lack of communication. Workers felt management was not listening to them. Management felt worker was not listening to them, and so on. Just misunderstandings. Otherwise, everything was perfect. So this is what happens. So I have such a long discourse was because I wanted to emphasize why communication is so important and why misunderstandings could be so serious. So they could lead to a conflict of that proportion. Then, okay, now quickly coming to structure, conflicts may happen because of, you can see the slide, right? So
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
conflicts may happen because of structural issues like the nature of job. You are not comfortable with your job, or the way it has to be done, or the process, or the role. I discussed about role. There is role incompatibility. There is role ambiguity. There are no role clear expectations. There is goal incompatibility. Leadership styles are not very effective. Reward system is not very promising or incentivizing. Disagreements are existing in the way groups have been designed. So structural issues are again an important factor that could lead to conflict. And then personal variables. Personal variables is personality and orientation and the way you think. Some people, they get into more of conflicts. Some people not. Some people are always maybe at argument. Some people not so much. So nature of person, personality type, your way of working, your way of thinking, that could also impact the fact that you could get into conflicts sooner or faster as compared to maybe others. So these are antecedent conditions, okay? The factors that lead to conflict. Now what happens stage 2? When some of these factors, they exist, conflicts will happen. So cognition and personalization. Conflict will be felt, or it will be understood that there is a conflict. So there are two kinds of cognitions that may happen: perceived conflict and felt conflict. It means some conflict is there. Sometimes conflicts are very evident. It's very obvious. Sometimes not so obvious. So this is the difference. Perceived conflict is awareness by one or more parties of the existence of conditions that have caused conflicts to happen. Felt conflict is when you are so emotionally involved in that conflict, it starts affecting you and you start feeling mental pressure or anxiety or tension or frustration or whatever, hostility. So this is felt conflict. So perceived conflict is you understand that there is some problem, and felt conflict is when that problem starts affecting us emotionally. So it starts affecting my behavior, my performance, my activity. It may lead to anxiety, tensions, and so on. So anyway, what is happening is that some kind of problem is there. It is being perceived that it is there, and it will start getting manifest in terms of my behavior, in terms of me feeling worried or tensed or anxious or whatever, and that will start getting into, percolating into my performance or my behavior and so on. So this is appearance of conflict. Because of the antecedent conditions, conflicts may start becoming manifest or they may start appearing. Now, the third stage is intentions. Now, what happens is, intentions is what is the intention of the manager. Actually, we're talking about the intention of the manager to handle conflict. Now, what do you do as a manager to handle conflict? Now, there are two dimensions to understand intentions: cooperativeness and assertiveness. How cooperative you are, or you want to satisfy the other person and cooperate with the other person in terms of the fact that there is a problem, and how assertive you are. Depending on how cooperative and how assertive you are, your intention to handle that conflict will be impacted. Some people are very cooperative, some are not. Similarly, some people are very assertive, some are not. So, on these two dimensions, we will have different conflict intentions. So, cooperativeness is on one axis of this matrix, assertiveness is on the other axis of the matrix. A person can be uncooperative or cooperative. So, low cooperation to high cooperation. Similarly, a person may be unassertive to highly assertive. That means low on assertiveness and high on assertiveness. Based on whether you are cooperative or assertive or low or high on both, you can have 5 ways of handling a conflict, 5 conflict handling intentions. What are these? Look at the first. Let's see. Okay, let's start with collaborating. What is collaborating intention? From this matrix, what can you understand? What is this collaborating intention of handling conflict?
Satisfy the needs of both the parties.
Right. Now, what is happening here is that the person is cooperative also. He wants to satisfy the other person also. He wants to listen to the other person also. But at the same time, you are an assertive manager. You want to assert also. You want to express your point of view also and listen to the other person's point of view. This approach of handling a conflict is called as collaborating. What you're doing is you are collaborating. You are trying to, in a way, what is collaboration? Collaboration is when two parties come together, they put in the best and they maximize the output out of that. And the best output is gained. That is what we mean by collaboration, literally. So, in this kind of a situation, you will listen to the other party also, you will express your point of view also, and then you will arrive at the best possible solution to the problem. So you're cooperative as well as assertive, and you will be arriving at a very good solution to this problem. This is called as collaboration. Now, is this okay? Is this an okay strategy? What is the problem with this strategy? Or is it fine? We should always collaborate. Is it okay? Answer me.
Ma'am, it depends upon situation.
Everything depends on situation. So what is that situation? Yes? Uh-huh. Collaboration is a it appears to be an okay strategy, right? Or is it, what is the problem with collaboration? Okay, no problem. See, the problem with collaboration is that apparently it appears to be the best strategy, but we cannot, it's not very practical. We cannot always collaborate, because collaboration says that I express my point of view also and I listen to your point of view also, and then we arrive at the best possible solution. Is it always practical? Is it always so possible to arrive at the best solution for everything? If it was so possible, then probably everything would be sorted out, and there would be no problems in organizations. So the problem is that collaboration apparently appears to be the best strategy, but it is not very workable. It is not very practical to have a solution which is agreeable to you also and which is agreeable to me also, and it is 100% solution. Those kinds of situations might not always prevail. It's a very, very hypothetical situation. Sometimes, yes, sometimes it may happen, but not always. I may not listen to you 100%, you may not listen to me 100%. And that is when we cannot completely collaborate. We cannot have a 100% solution. We cannot have a perfect solution. Whereas collaboration looks like a perfect solution. Sometimes it may happen, but not every time. So, in that case, when that kind of a perfect solution is not possible, we arrive at compromising. What is compromising? If you look at the matrix, what is it? Compromising is a midway kind of a solution. Midway means that you are being cooperative also to a certain extent, and you are being assertive also to a certain extent. How is it different from collaborating? It is different because it is not a perfect solution. It is a midway solution. If you look at the placement, it's a midway solution. You are being cooperative to a certain extent, you are also being assertive to a certain extent, but it is not a perfect solution. It's a middle path. So, compromising means you agree to certain things that I say, and I agree to certain things that you say, and we arrive at a compromise, a middle course, which is not perfect solution, which is not as good as collaborating, but which is acceptable, agreeable. Okay, it's a compromise. In real life, what happens most of the time? Collaboration or compromise?
Compromise.
Compromises. Because why they happen? Because you may not agree to everything that I'm saying, and similarly I will not agree. So we will arrive at something which is partially agreeable. A mutual give and take will be there, and then okay, fine, we will arrive at something which is at least acceptable to both. So most of the time conflicts are sorted out through compromise, which is not a perfect solution, but it is a workable solution. It is more practical, more feasible, more possible, looking at the differences, because there are differences and you can't give up all your differences, because otherwise then obviously there would be no conflict. So keeping those differences in mind, we will arrive at some kind of acceptable solution. So it's compromise. So compromise is where most of the conflicts get resorted by way of compromise only. Now look at the other three solutions. Competing, what is this? Competing, what is happening in a competing kind of a situation?
They are not cooperative.
I just need a 1 minute break. I have to switch on the AC. Okay. Right. Sorry for that. So in competing, what is happening? It is high on assertiveness and it is low on cooperativeness. What is this strategy? And how good is it? And how bad is it?
Ma'am, in this both the parties are thinking they are correct, so they are competing. No one listening to each other.
No, no, no. So it is from the point of view of one person. Okay, so as a manager, I am highly assertive, but not so cooperative, low on cooperativeness. So I adopt a competing strategy. What is happening here? In this kind of a strategy, I assert as a manager, which means that I would try to ensure that my point of view prevails. And I will not listen to you because I'm low on cooperativeness. So it's called as a competing strategy where only my view prevails. Okay. So my conflict intention is to assert. It's called as competing. And what is happening is that my point of view is prevailing. I have prevailed over you. I have dominated over you. I have asserted myself over you. So it's called as a competing strategy of conflict handling. Now tell me, is it okay, Mohammed Saad?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it okay? Competing strategy?
No, no, ma'am, not okay.
It's not okay. Why? Arham,
Yes, ma'am.
please participate, all of you. So is it okay? Is it okay to have a competing strategy of?
I think this kind of a strategy can be very destructive because if a person feels that he is right all the time, and if the person will try to assert his own opinion, then in case if the person is wrong, then it might be very destructive for the organization.
All right. Okay. So it could be
I
destructive.
think
Hmm?
I think it could be working
It could be working.
as
How?
far as long as we are taking the competition level to the point of peak performance of conflict. It could be very constructing also because conflicting party will bring out the best solution, and ultimately the better one will win. So it can bring about innovation.
See, in competing strategy, what is happening is that one person is prevailing. Okay. If we are talking of conflict handling intentions from the point of view of how I handle conflicts. Okay, from as a manager. So I may collaborate, I may compromise, I may compete, and so on. Now, if my strategy or my approach is to be uncooperative, and assertive. So what is happening is I assert myself. As I said, I will dominate, and my point of view will prevail, my opinion will prevail, my solution will prevail, and you have to accept what I'm saying. Now, as Bilal pointed out, this kind of a strategy may not be very good for an organization, because what is happening is that you are, in a way, subjugating the other point of view. You are subverting the other point of view. You are silencing the other point of view. And you're just trying to assert yourself. You're just trying to emphasize your own point of view. So as a manager, you are maybe asserting yourself over people who are who are working below you, under you, or at lower levels, and you may try to subvert them or subjugate or whatever, express your point of view, assert your point of view, and get your way, get your things done, competing. It may not be a good strategy. But why do we discuss it then if it's not a good strategy? We discuss it because it is one of the strategies of handling conflict. It is a common strategy to handle conflict, and many a times managers have to adopt this strategy. Wakas, you want to say something?
Ma'am, I have a question. What if the decision is all about like there is no middle ground? What if it's a very critical decision like to do or not to do? So in that case, how can we like opt for any other things? Like we have to compete to get our idea to.
Yeah,
That's what my
I could
question.
not listen to what you said in the beginning.
Ma'am, what if the question is about the critical decision? Like the only options are to do or not to do.
Huh.
Like there are certain situations.
I got it. So that is what I'm trying to emphasize. Many a times, as managers, and I discussed this earlier also, that OB is about people and all that, so we adopt a soft approach and all that, but you can't be soft all the time. Many a times, managers have to take harsh decisions. Many a times, managers have to take difficult decisions. Many a times, managers have to assert when the issue is so important and pivotal that it is going to affect the working of the organization, the larger interest of the organization, then sometimes you have to assert when you are sure and confident that your point of view is correct and the other person's point of view is detrimental to the working of the organization. It is going to hamper the working of the organization. It is going to cause problems for the organization. So keeping the larger interest of the organization in mind, keeping the larger interest of people in general in mind, or the working of the organization in mind, many a times as managers we have to assert, we have to take a one-sided decision. We have to silence, as we say, in a certain way, we have to silence the conflict and the problem which is happening. If as a manager I feel that this issue is a non-issue, it's just people are trying to just create a problem, they do not have the interest of the organization in mind, maybe this person is a regular problem creator, maybe this person is just trying to disrupt the working of the organization, and when that happens, as a manager you have to take a harsh decision. You can't be collaborating and competing with everybody, sorry, compromising with everybody. You have to look at the issue. And if the issue is such where you feel that this person's point of view is going to affect the larger interest of the organization or affect people adversely, then you assert yourself when you're confident that what you are saying is right. So as managers, many a times we have to assert ourselves to, as we say, stop that conflict from growing any further, because we feel that this is the time when there is something important which is going to be affected or some important decision has to be taken, and in that case I may just come plain and clear and I may say no, we are not going to listen to anything, and that's it. And managers do it every day, right? So we have to do this. We have to sometimes adopt a competing approach. You got the point, Nidal, Wakas, Bilal, all of you?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Right. Accommodating, quickly, then we wind up. Accommodating, is that a good strategy? What is it? What is happening in accommodating? In accommodating, you are high on cooperativeness and you are low on assertiveness. You are not asserting yourself. You are just listening to what they have to say, the other person has to say. You are just accommodating the other person's point of view. Is this okay? Arbaz?
Ma'am, like we talked about the competing part. So if the person is sure that the other person's idea is right, then it might be good. But sometimes some disagreement should also be there if he's not sure about the other person's idea.
Right. So, but the same idea, the same logic that sometimes you have to accommodate. If you feel that even if maybe the other person is not, you know, right in all ways, but sometimes we just accommodate maybe for the time being, because we feel that maybe this will lead to a problem. This happens in a lot of cases. Companies, there are trade unions, there are worker groups who are demanding something. Sometimes managers don't assert, they just agree to what the trade union is saying or what the worker representatives are saying, because you don't want the problems right now to happen, because work will get affected in the factory. There is high demand, you want the factory output to not be not get disrupted. So you will just agree to their demands and requests, and so that work just goes on smoothly. Maybe later on we'll handle it. So what is happening is that you are accommodating, you are just listening to what the other person is saying. You are not asserting, not putting your point of view. You are only accommodating the other person's perspective. This is also one important conflict handling strategy. We have to sometimes listen to the other person. We have to sometimes accommodate the other person's interest. If we feel this is a larger interest of the people, many people are affected by it. If we don't listen to them, there could be problems, there could be strikes, or some kind of unrest could be there. So okay, in those cases we might agree to what the other person is saying. Managers sometimes use this tactically also. This strategy they use tactically also. So okay, for the time being, let us accommodate. Later on, maybe after 3 months, when the demand goes down, then maybe we will take care of this issue. Abhi maan lete hain unki baat. So those kinds of things. So we use these strategies tactically also. And then the last, avoiding. What kind of strategy is it? You are low on cooperativeness, low on assertiveness. In those situations, you will avoid the situation. You will avoid the person, you will avoid the problem. You will not talk about it, you will not listen to the issues, you will not bring them up, you will just avoid the problem. Is it okay?
And sometimes it's okay to avoid the illogical problems and
Okay.
as
So avoidance, all right. So avoidance is not a good strategy. It's not a good strategy, because how can you just avoid a problem? If there is a problem, something has to be done. You have to address it in certain ways, but whether you assert or you cooperate or whatever, you have to address it. But as you said, sometimes again keeping the other things in mind, the times in mind, the business issues in mind, the imperatives in mind, sometimes we just avoid. And as you said, it may be because the problem might not be very serious, not be very important. It may be a trivial issue. You don't want to waste your time on trivial things. So we just avoid the problem, or we avoid a person. And many a times you will see that avoidance works very well. If you avoid the issue or the problem settles by itself. The person understands that I am being avoided. Nobody is listening to me, maybe. And maybe what I'm saying is not important. What I'm saying is irrelevant. So that person himself or herself will stop, talking about that issue or presenting that issue as a conflict or whatever. So the problem will, as we say, it will fizzle out by itself. So many a times when the problem is not very serious or big, and you just feel that somebody is just trying to create a problem and nothing else, in that case, we may avoid. And avoidance may work very well in lot of cases, and the problem settles by itself. So these are 5 different strategies. All have their own merits and demerits, but most of the time, most business organizations, they adopt a compromising stance. That is the most common strategy of handling conflicts that is adopted, but the other 4 are also frequently adopted. So most of the time we compromise, but in certain times competing may be good, in certain times accommodating may be good, and so on. So different strategies may work at different times. So these are different conflict handling intentions. I've discussed this. I'm moving on, the 5 strategies. And again, I have discussed this. When avoidance should be adopted, when accommodation should be adopted. So when harmony and stability are important over one's own interest, we can go for adoption. Okay. Competing, when you know you are right, you can assert yourself. Collaboration, it's the best possible solution. It's a win-win solution, but it is not very workable. It may not be always practical. Compromise is by far the most practical solution. Most companies, most of the time, use a compromise as a conflict handling strategy. So these are the different strategies. Then we come to the 4th stage. After you have used a certain strategy, compromise or whatever, accommodating or competing, the 4th stage is the outcome of that. Now, what happens in the 4th stage? Something will happen. Some behavioral change will be there. Either you will reach at a no conflict situation, which means now the conflict has been settled. It is taken care of. It is over because you have already compromised or collaborated or you have done something. So conflict is over. So this is what may happen. If not, then something else will happen. And what will happen? That conflicts may become even more serious. Either it is settled, or if it is not handled in the right way, then it is not settled. Then something else will happen. So minor disagreements may continue, or it may become more serious. Overt questioning or challenging may happen, or it may become even more serious. Assertive verbal attacks may happen, threats may start to take place, aggressive physical attacks may start taking place, or in the most extreme case, something violent may start happening. So annihilatory conflict, as we call it. So either the conflict will be settled, or if you have used the wrong strategy, you have used a competing strategy in a situation where it was not needed, or you have used some other strategy where it was not needed, and the conflict is not settled. When it is not settled, it may lead to some of these situations. The conflict may become even more serious, it may become violent, it may become more aggressive. So if the conflict is not handled well in the previous stage, then this is what may happen. So either there will be no conflict, or there will be even more aggressive conflict, or more evident or overt conflicts that may happen. So behavior will be an outcome of the previous stage. And stage 5 is the final outcome. So if you have handled the conflict well, it will lead to functional outcomes. There will be better group performance, there will be better decisions, more creativity, better problem solving, because the conflict has been taken care of, better environment. But if you have not taken care of the conflict well, there will be dysfunctional outcomes. There could be more discontent, there could be reduced performance, reduced group effectiveness, communication will become even worse, group cohesiveness will be shattered, and more infighting will happen. So if you have not handled the conflict well, this is what may happen. So stage 3 is the most important stage of handling the entire issue, conflicts. So we just now discussed all this. Conflict management is the use of all those techniques that we have discussed to basically handle issues. Then what we discussed in stage 3 were conflict handling techniques, which we adopt after conflict has taken place. But what I'm discussing now is conflict management. Conflict management is a broader approach to ensure that conflicts don't happen also altogether. So if they happen, then you have to use one of those techniques, collaboration and competing and accommodating and so on. But broadly speaking, we must have in place a certain approach to conflict management, which means that try to create a culture where conflicts don't happen, or minimal conflicts happen. So we must have a broader perspective of conflict. Try to have in place a conflict management system where your culture is such, your style of working is such that conflicts don't happen regularly. Sometimes it's okay. So superordinate goals. What is this? Superordinate goals. We all have goals in our life, isn't it? Every employee has goals. But when we come to the organization, we must remember that the organization's goals are superordinate. They are above our personal goals. They are above the interest of the organization is above our own personal interests. That superordinate goal has to be upheld. Every organization has to ensure that people value the organization, they value the vision and mission of the organization, and they remember that the organization's goals are important. And my personal interest, my vested interest, my personal aspirations, they are not above the organization. So we have to agree to that. We have to accept that. When everybody accepts that, there will be less of conflicts. Then expansion of resources. When you have resources, try to ensure that it is equitably distributed. If you have a reward system, everybody should benefit out of it. So equitable distribution of resources should take place. Otherwise, conflicts will happen. Then smoothing of day-to-day relationships. Every day you must try to talk to people, listen to people, understand people, have a good approach towards your juniors, your subordinates. Listen to them. If they have any problems, try to resolve them immediately. So everyday relationships, day-to-day relationships must be smoothened out. At Maruti, what was happening was that there was a lot of focus on systems and processes and everything, but probably day to day communication issues they were ignoring and neglecting, and because of which such a big issue happened. So, everyday relationships have to be handled. As a manager, every day you have to be a leader, not just one day. So every day you have to listen to people, talk to them, communicate with them, and try to build a certain rapport with them, and try to understand if they have a problem, how can we address that problem, and that is how you can ensure that there are minimal conflicts. There are a lot of iconic leaders that we know of in India also. Ratan Tata, for instance, Narayan Murthy of Infosys, for instance, they are known as iconic leaders because they had a certain rapport with their people. Narayan Murthy, especially, it is said that Narayan Murthy used to have his lunch, his tiffin with the normal everyday workers at Infosys. He used to sit on the ground, having chai with them and just discussing the problems with people. So it was not a formal meeting that he would have with his employees. Every day he would just have around the campus and just talk to anybody who was standing or anybody who was sitting somewhere. He would just sit with them and just talk and discuss. So that is the kind of rapport that he built with his people, and that is why he's supposed to be one of the most remarkable leaders that corporate India has seen. So everyday relationships are important. Then alter the structural variables. If somebody is not comfortable in that role, try to change something there. If somebody is not comfortable with the task that he's doing, try to work out what is the problem. So try to change those things so that people become more comfortable and more functional in what they are doing. Build a conducive culture, a good culture where people trust each other and so on, have a strong organizational philosophy, and most importantly, have smoke detectors for potential conflicts. What are these smoke detectors? I'll stop with this last point. What are these smoke detectors? Have smoke detectors for potential conflicts. What do we mean by this?
Ma'am, the personal conflicts that happen between the workers.
Hmm.
So,
So,
so
okay,
we should be aware about the conflicts that are about to happen.
right. So how to become aware? What are these smoke detectors that we are talking about?
Informal communication with employees.
Yes.
Informal communication.
Or all right, informal communication with employee is a smoke detector in a certain way. Why? Because when you informally communicate, you get to know a lot of things that you will not get to know through formal communication. Because informal talking brings out a lot of things that formal communication will not bring out. So it helps you detect. It acts like a smoke detector. It helps you detect that there is a certain problem somewhere. Something is brewing up, and you understand that there is a problem. So there are a lot of things that we do: informal communication, listening to people, feedback collection. A lot of companies, they do surveys also within the company, like a job satisfaction survey, a motivation survey, salary satisfaction survey. All of these are just data collection surveys that you do to understand it. What is the problem? Or are they satisfied with salary? Are they satisfied with the supervision? Are they satisfied with the promotion policy? Are people satisfied with the career options available in the organization? So surveys are done. Companies do a lot of surveys. They distribute questionnaires, etc., and they collect data anonymously and then compile them and see how people are responding to different kinds of problems in the organization. That is also a smoke detector. Similarly, for example, you have exit interviews. Do you know what are exit interviews?
When the people are leaving, so they can give their review about the company, how they enjoy their work.
You're not very clear, Ahad. Mohammed Asad. Ahad.
Ma'am, when the employer are leaving, so we can tell about his actions
Yeah.
about the company, how he
All
feels.
right. So, okay, Mohammed Faizan, what is an exit interview? Okay. So, when people leave an organization, companies often do exit interviews. Exit interview is now a person is leaving on his own will and on his own free volition. We just talk to that person formally, informally, to try to find out why he is leaving. Now, because that person is leaving, he doesn't have any fear. All his compensation, all the formalities are done. We do the exit interview after that. So he's at ease. Many a times, a psychologist or a certain other manager talks to this person and tries to find out why are you leaving? Just tell us the reason. And through empathy and through very informal communication and feedback, they try to get some information from this person. And most of the time, the person tells something that the organization is not aware of. And because this person tells that I am leaving because of this reason, it is like a smoke detector. The organization understands that if one person is leaving because of this problem, maybe there are others also who are experiencing the same problem, but they are not saying anything. Maybe they also start leaving, or maybe they will create some trouble. So it means that there is a problem, and that problem has to be addressed. So, exit interview is basically a very effective smoke detector. It tells what is the problem, why people are leaving, and let us then address that problem, because others will also leave, or if they will not leave, they will create some problem. So let us try to address that. So these are all ways of detecting smoke, detecting that there is a problem happening somewhere, or likely to happen, or a problem brewing up, and we need to address that problem. So enough for today. I'll stop with this. Maybe one or two issues are left in group that we'll take up in the next class. I think we have a class on Friday. So now I want to take up the articles, etc., that we had shared. One article I had shared, I want to take it up in the next class. And one case study I will share with you, miracle case, written case I will share with you. Miracle case I had discussed in the first period that we had on a group. So I'll share the written case. Please read that case, and maybe on Friday we will discuss that also. And some other associated issues related to group and conflict, we will discuss then, Friday and Saturday. Okay? All right? Zareen, are you here?
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, then let's close